Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Jawad, and today we're going to unpack something that's quietly sabotaging millions of people who are trying to lose weight, manage their health, or simply feel better in their own bodies. That's not just diet, it's not just exercise, it's sleep, or more specifically, the lack of it. Yes, sleep deprivation can absolutely lead to weight gain. When we think about the reasons people struggle with weight gain, most of us focus on calories, carbs, or lack of exercise. But one of the most overlooked and powerful influences on our eating habits is something far more subtle. More specifically, the lack of it. As a physician who has worked extensively in metabolic health and obesity treatment, I can tell you that poor sleep doesn't just make you tired, it rewires your brain in ways that make smart eating decisions nearly impossible. And one of the most critical ways it does this is by impairing your impulse control and altering how your brain responds to food. When you're sleep deprived, the part of your brain responsible for rational thought and decision making, the prefrontal cortex, becomes significantly less active. This region helps you weigh pros and cons, delay gratification, and make thoughtful choices. It's the part of the brain that allows you to say no to the second slice of cake or to opt for the salad instead of fries. But after a night or two of poor sleep, this executive function becomes sluggish and your ability to resist temptation decreases dramatically. In contrast, the reward centers of the brain, particularly the amygdala and the nucleus accumbens, become hyperactive. These areas are deeply involved in pleasure seeking behavior and respond strongly to high calorie, high sugar foods. In other words, when you're low on sleep, your brain is operating in a state of imbalance. Your rational control system is weakened and your reward seeking system is overactive. This means you're not only more likely to crave unhealthy foods, but you're also less likely to resist those cravings. Studies using functional MRI scans show that the sleep deprived brain lights up more in response to pictures of junk food than a well rested brain does, and it shows diminished activity in the regions associated with self control. This imbalance is further amplified by shifts in neurotransmitters. Sleep loss reduces levels of serotonin, which plays a role in mood and appetite regulation. It also interferes with dopamine signaling, leading to a greater need for instant gratification, often satisfied by food. That's why people often report late night snacking or binge eating episodes when they're tired. It's not just habit, it's a neurochemical drive triggered by sleep deprivation. Moreover, there's a behavioral component at play. People who are tired are more likely to seek energy from food, particularly fast acting, high sugar foods, in an attempt to stay alert. You might not even be physically hungry, but your body perceives an energy deficit and drives you to eat more as compensation. This results in excessive caloric intake, usually from the worst possible sources. It becomes a vicious cycle. Sleep loss leads to poor food choices, which lead to weight gain, which in turn affects sleep quality, and the cycle continues. For patients struggling with weight management, this is a crucial point. It's not just about willpower or discipline. When you're sleep deprived, your brain chemistry is stacked against you. You're trying to make healthy choices in a brain that's wired to crave the opposite. That's why addressing sleep quality and duration is one of the foundational steps in any effective weight loss plan. Until sleep is optimized, no amount of dieting or exercise will produce sustainable results. The brain must be supported to make good decisions, and that starts with consistent quality rest. So, the next time you find yourself reaching for that bag of chips or ordering takeout instead of cooking something healthy, ask yourself, am I really hungry or am I just tired? Most of the time, it's the latter. And the most powerful fix might not be another diet but a better night's sleep. One of the most critical but often misunderstood effects of sleep deprivation is its direct impact on your metabolism and the way your body processes glucose and stores fat. As a physician, I frequently encounter patients who are making sincere efforts to eat better and move more, yet they remain frustrated by stagnant weight or even weight gain. When we dig deeper, it becomes clear that poor sleep is at the core of their metabolic dysfunction. When you don't get enough sleep, typically less than 7 hours a night, your body begins to operate in a state of physiological stress. This has a cascade of effects on your hormonal systems, particularly those related to metabolism and insulin sensitivity. Sleep is the time when the body repairs itself, rebalances hormones, and restores cellular function. When that process is interrupted or shortened, the systems that regulate energy use and fat storage begin to malfunction. One of the key processes affected is insulin sensitivity. Insulin is a hormone that allows your cells to absorb glucose from the bloodstream to use for energy. In a well rested body, insulin functions efficiently, but even a single night of inadequate sleep can begin to impair your insulin sensitivity. The result? Your cells become more resistant to insulin and glucose remains elevated in your blood. Over time, this leads to increased fat storage, particularly around the abdomen, and raises your risk for developing type 2 diabetes. A landmark study from the University of Chicago demonstrated that after just 4 nights of restricted sleep, healthy young adults showed insulin resistance levels similar to those seen in people with prediabetes. Think about that, just 4 nights of poor sleep can mimic the early stages of a chronic metabolic disorder. If this becomes a chronic pattern, it sets the stage for persistent weight gain, especially visceral fat, which is the most dangerous kind stored deep around your internal organs. Beyond insulin, sleep deprivation also affects your resting metabolic rate RMR, the number of calories your body burns at rest. Several studies have shown that sleep deprived individuals have a reduced RMR compared to those who are well rested. This means your body burns fewer calories doing the same basic functions like breathing, digesting, and circulating blood. So, even if your eating habits remain the same, you're now burning less energy, which naturally leads to weight gain over time. Another factor to consider is the shift in how your body uses energy when you're sleep deprived. Normally, the body prefers to burn fat for fuel when at rest. But when you're running low on sleep, your body shifts toward using carbohydrates for quick energy, conserving fat stores instead of breaking them down. This not only disrupts fat loss but also leads to faster blood sugar spikes and crashes, driving hunger and cravings. Additionally, chronic sleep deprivation increases cortisol levels, your body's primary stress hormone. Elevated cortisol not only contributes to fat storage, particularly around the midsection, but it also promotes muscle breakdown. Muscle is metabolically active tissue. The more lean mass you have, the more calories you burn, even at rest. So, when sleep loss leads to a decrease in muscle mass and an increase in fat storage, it becomes even more difficult to manage weight. This metabolic shift is not a rare or subtle phenomenon. It's something we can measure, observe, and reverse, but only if we recognize the role sleep plays. Patients are often surprised to learn that improving their sleep quality and duration can lead to better blood sugar control, improved energy levels, and more successful weight management, sometimes without changing a single thing in their diet or exercise routine. In clinical practice, I always emphasize this. Your metabolism doesn't reset in the gym or the kitchen, it resets in your bedroom. Consistent, high quality sleep is not just helpful for weight management, it is absolutely essential. Without it, the body's natural balance between energy intake and expenditure becomes disrupted, making fat loss an uphill battle. Addressing sleep isn't optional, it's the missing link in sustainable metabolic health. Among the many physiological consequences of sleep deprivation, one that often flies under the radar but plays a major role in weight gain is the persistent elevation of cortisol. Cortisol is your body's primary stress hormone produced by the adrenal glands in response to both physical and psychological stress. In short bursts, cortisol is beneficial. It helps mobilize energy and sharpen focus during moments of threat or pressure. But when it stays elevated chronically, as it often does with insufficient sleep, it becomes a powerful contributor to weight gain, particularly around the abdominal area. When we sleep, especially during the early phases of deep non-REM sleep, the body begins to regulate and reduce cortisol production. It's a critical time for hormonal balance and cellular repair. But when sleep is shortened, interrupted, or poor in quality, the body fails to go through these restorative phases efficiently. As a result, cortisol levels remain high well into the next day, sometimes for prolonged periods. This persistent state of elevation sets off a chain reaction that makes fat loss extremely difficult, even if your diet and exercise are otherwise on point. One of cortisol's key effects is that it increases the breakdown of muscle tissue. It does this to provide glucose to the brain during times of stress. From an evolutionary perspective, this made sense. If you were in danger and not eating, cortisol would help liberate fuel for survival. But in today's context, with high cortisol triggered by lack of sleep, traffic, work pressure, or emotional distress, that same biological mechanism works against us. Losing muscle mass is problematic because muscle is metabolically active tissue. The more lean muscle you have, the more calories your body burns at rest. So when cortisol breaks down muscle while simultaneously promoting fat storage, your body composition shifts in the wrong direction: more fat, less muscle. Cortisol also promotes fat storage in a very specific and dangerous way by increasing visceral fat, the fat that surrounds internal organs in the abdominal cavity. Visceral fat is not just a storage depot, it is metabolically active and inflammatory, and its presence is strongly linked to insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, and cardiovascular disease. In patients who report chronic fatigue, poor sleep, and high stress, I often find elevated waist circumference and other signs of visceral fat accumulation, even in those who are not overweight by conventional BMI standards. But cortisol doesn't stop there. It also has a significant impact on appetite and cravings. High cortisol levels stimulate appetite, particularly for high sugar, high fat foods. This is due in part to cortisol's interaction with another hormone called neuropeptide Y, which increases in states of stress and drives the desire for comfort foods. These aren't foods your body needs, they're foods your brain craves to create a short term sense of calm. Unfortunately, these calorie dense choices only compound weight gain, especially when they occur alongside a reduced metabolic rate and lower physical activity, which are also common consequences of sleep loss. Patients often say things like, "I don't understand it, my diet hasn't changed, but I'm still gaining weight." When I hear this, one of the first things I evaluate is their sleep pattern and stress load. More often than not, their cortisol rhythm is disrupted, and they are unknowingly living in a constant state of hormonal imbalance that favors fat accumulation over fat loss. Correcting this requires a multi-pronged approach, but it always begins with improving sleep hygiene. Consistent, high-quality sleep helps regulate cortisol levels naturally, restoring the normal diurnal rhythm where cortisol is highest in the morning to help wake you up and lowest at night to allow for rest and repair. When we restore that rhythm, we not only improve stress resilience but also remove one of the most stubborn blocks to weight loss. In summary, chronic sleep deprivation leads to elevated cortisol, which in turn increases appetite, promotes abdominal fat storage, breaks down muscle tissue, and shifts metabolism in a direction that favors weight gain. If you want to lose fat and keep it off, sleep isn't just supportive, it's essential. Until cortisol is under control, your body will always prioritize survival over fat loss. And the most effective way to regulate cortisol starts with getting better sleep, night after night. The relationship between sleep and weight gain isn't speculative, it's been repeatedly validated by high quality scientific studies across a wide range of populations. As a physician who treats patients struggling with weight, I always emphasize that sleep is not just a passive state where nothing important happens. On the contrary, sleep is an active, regulated, and metabolically critical process. And the data is clear. Insufficient sleep directly correlates with increased risk of weight gain and obesity, regardless of diet or exercise. Let's look at one of the most well known studies in this field. Researchers at the University of Chicago conducted a controlled trial in which participants followed a calorie restricted diet. One group slept 8.5 hours per night, while another group was limited to 5.5 hours. Both groups lost weight, but here's the striking part. Those who got enough sleep lost over 55% more body fat than those who were sleep deprived. The group that slept less lost more lean mass and preserved more fat mass. That is a major concern, especially considering how important muscle mass is for metabolic health and fat burning potential. What this tells us is that sleep doesn't just affect how much weight you lose, it affects what kind of weight you lose. With poor sleep, your body holds on to fat and breaks down muscle, leading to unfavorable changes in body composition. And from a long term health perspective, losing muscle while preserving fat is the exact opposite of what we want. Now consider observational data. One large cohort study published in the journal Sleep followed over 60,000 women for 16 years. The findings were very clear. Women who consistently slept 5 hours or less per night were 32% more likely to gain 33 pounds or more compared to those who slept at least 7 hours. These were not women who necessarily had poor diets or sedentary lifestyles. In fact, many of them were otherwise healthy. The only consistent variable was the duration of their sleep. In another meta analysis that pooled results from over 2 dozen studies involving adults, short sleep duration was associated with a significant increase in the odds of obesity. This pattern held true across countries, age groups, and socioeconomic backgrounds. The conclusion was unambiguous. Chronic sleep restriction is a major independent risk factor for weight gain and obesity. The science also dives into what happens at the neurochemical level. Functional MRI studies show that sleep deprived individuals have heightened activity in reward related areas of the brain when shown pictures of unhealthy food. This increased activation correlates with actual behavior. People who are sleep deprived not only crave more junk food, they eat more of it. In a controlled setting, sleep deprived individuals consume an average of 300 to 500 more calories per day, primarily from carbohydrates and fat. That's enough to account for nearly a pound of weight gain per week if the pattern is sustained. When I present these findings to patients, there is often a sense of relief. Many people blame themselves for lacking willpower or not trying hard enough. But the truth is, biology is powerful, and when your sleep is compromised, your body is working against you. These studies provide more than just insight. They offer validation that sleep is a fundamental pillar of weight regulation, not an afterthought. What I often say in clinical settings is this: if sleep were a medication, every doctor would prescribe it for weight loss. The evidence is that strong. It improves insulin sensitivity, regulates hunger hormones, protects muscle tissue, reduces fat accumulation, and decreases cravings. And unlike medications, it's free, safe, and available to everyone if we're willing to prioritize it. The takeaway here is simple. Science doesn't lie. The connection between poor sleep and weight gain is not theoretical. It is measurable, repeatable, and incredibly consistent. If weight loss is your goal, ignoring sleep is like trying to sail a boat with a hole in the hull. You can paddle as hard as you want, but unless you fix the leak, your sleep, you're not going to get far. One of the most encouraging aspects of the relationship between sleep and weight is this: it's highly modifiable. While we can't always change our genetics or fully control our work schedules, we can make deliberate, impactful changes to how we sleep. And when we do, the benefits extend far beyond improved energy and mood. They directly support fat loss, appetite control, metabolic efficiency, and overall physical health. As a physician, I've seen firsthand how patients struggling with weight loss hit a plateau despite following sound nutritional and exercise regimens. But when we begin to improve their sleep, both in quantity and quality, progress resumes. That's because sleep is one of the few lifestyle levers that simultaneously affects multiple systems involved in weight regulation. It modulates hormones, alters neural reward pathways, regulates blood sugar, and even influences inflammation. No diet or supplement can replicate that level of systemic impact. When individuals begin consistently getting 7 to 9 hours of high quality sleep each night, we often observe several positive physiological shifts. First, hunger hormones stabilize. Ghrelin levels, which rise with sleep deprivation and increase hunger, begin to normalize. At the same time, leptin, the hormone that signals fullness, becomes more responsive. This hormonal recalibration allows people to feel satisfied with appropriate portions and reduces late night snacking or cravings for sugary foods. Second, energy levels increase. This might seem obvious, but it's crucial. When people are well rested, they are more physically active without having to force themselves. They're more likely to complete workouts, take walks, move around during the day, all of which increase energy expenditure. In contrast, chronic fatigue from poor sleep drives sedentary behavior, and the less we move, the fewer calories we burn, regardless of what we eat. Improved sleep also leads to better glucose regulation. This is particularly important for patients who are pre-diabetic or insulin resistant. When sleep is optimized, insulin sensitivity improves, meaning the body can process carbohydrates more effectively and is less likely to store them as fat. This also reduces the number of energy crashes throughout the day, preventing the cycle of overeating and sugar cravings driven by fluctuating blood glucose levels. Additionally, adequate sleep promotes muscle recovery and growth. This might be overlooked in weight loss conversations, but it's vital. Muscle tissue is metabolically active. It burns more calories at rest than fat tissue does. When patients are sleep deprived, not only do they build muscle less efficiently, but they also lose more of it during periods of calorie restriction. This means their metabolism slows and fat loss becomes more difficult. Conversely, when sleep is adequate, muscle is preserved or even increased, which helps maintain or boost the basal metabolic rate. There's also the psychological dimension. People who sleep well are more emotionally resilient, less reactive to stress, and more capable of sticking to long term behavioral goals. Sleep improves executive function, the part of the brain that controls planning, impulse control, and decision making. This makes it easier to say no to the second helping, choose healthier meals, and maintain consistency with exercise and meal planning. In contrast, chronic sleep loss undermines these abilities, making it harder to follow through on even the best designed weight loss plans. Ultimately, what I tell patients is this: improving your sleep might feel passive, but it's one of the most active strategies you can implement for fat loss. It's not just a recovery tool, it's a metabolic reset switch. It affects the very systems that regulate appetite, fat storage, and energy output. You don't need to overhaul your entire life overnight, but you can start with a consistent bedtime, a cool and dark sleep environment, and a commitment to making sleep a non negotiable part of your health strategy. The payoff is substantial: better metabolic health, improved body composition, and a dramatically easier path to sustainable weight loss. In my clinical experience, optimizing sleep is often the missing link, and when it's corrected, everything else starts falling into place.